Händlerkeller. I welcome you all, and I'm very glad that you are here today with us to speak about Jennifer Makumbi's book, The First Woman, that just was translated into German, Die erste Frau, and is published at Transkontinental Verlag, Interkontinental Verlag. I always mix that up, that's funny why. But at the other room you have a table where we sell them as well, and we'd be happy if you take some home. I read both of them. I read the English and the German version, and I really liked them both. I think they are slightly different. The translation makes it slightly different, but they have very unique ways of speech, which we will talk about later as well when we talk about a little bit about the form of the book. But so that's like the organization side. We'd be happy if you buy some books, if you let them signed in the end of the discussion. As I said before, this is supposed to be a very open space, so it would be nice if we have a conversation, all of us. It's not only me talking here or asking the questions. When we hear the passages we chose for tonight, we can also then ask questions towards them, because it's Uganda. I don't know if someone has been there before. I have been, and I read the book before, and it was really hard to understand sometimes. How can I locate this? I don't know the word. And it's really cool to ask then Jennifer, what's the context about it? So at least that's what I did. I hope English is fine for you. I wouldn't repeat this in German now. We continue with English, okay? The most important thing is probably to introduce you now, as everyone knows who you are.
Okay.
You can, I did a little introduction. I wrote it down.
Okay.
So I would kind of read it out. I have to apologize. I'm here with my laptop. I was supposed to print them out, but I just came from Bonn with the train and it was far too late, so I couldn't print it out. So I have to, a digital native. No one would say that as a digital native. I'll read it out. So, Jennifer Makumbi is an author of novels and short stories. You were born and raised in Uganda, and your debut novel, Chintu, which is also here, and you can also buy it here, was published in 2014. In your novels, you draw on traditional oral storytelling traditions and interweave them with contemporary and historical phenomena. And in 2019, your short story collection, Manchester Happened, was published. And you were awarded for the Wyndham Campbell Literature Prize for your writing, and you won the Commonwealth Short Story Prize with your short story, Let's Tell the Story Properly. Maybe we talk about Manchester Happened later as well, if we have the time. There's so many things to talk about. And The First Woman was also named Book of the Year by the Sunday Times, The Observer, Daily Mail, BBC Culture, and the Irish Independent, and was awarded with the Jhalak-Preis for works of POC authors in the UK in 2021. Many prizes. And like I said, here's the German translation by Alakati Neithardt, and it was published in August 25th. I will say something about the context of the book before we go into the reading, so there are some ideas and people know. But if you want to say something first, we're kind of spontaneous here. We didn't really plan how we do it, so if you also want to say something, say hi before you can.
Okay. Hello everyone. Thank you for turning up this evening. I look forward to a wonderful conversation. Normally these tiny, cozy events are the best for authors like me, because then it's not formal. We just talk, and as if I'm not a guest, but someone you already know. So I hope we're going to have a wonderful conversation together.
So, about the book, so it's about Kirabo mainly, who grows up in Nateta, which is a fictional town actually, right? Is it a fictional town, Nateta?
It's
It's really. I tried to find it on Google Maps, and I didn't find it. And I was like, did she make this town up? It's where your mother was born. Interesting. Okay. So that's really interesting. Okay, so Kirabo grows up in the town where Jennifer's mother was born. In Uganda in the mid-1917, and she's a grandchild of a landowner in very financially supportive setting, right? She's loved, she has a very stable relationship with her grandparents. Her father is living in the city and working there, and she never met her mother. And this is how the book starts. She's in search for her mother. She's like, where is this woman? Who is she? Why is she not with me? And to find out, she seeks Nzuta, which is labeled as the village witch, because she had many men and let men do what she wants. That's kind of the framing of the villagers who are saying that. And she grows up, she falls in love. She moves to the city, to her father, and in the second part of the novel, the story of Nzuta and her grandmother is told. So this is like a general framing. I don't want to say a lot more because you should read the book to get to know the plot. And I think it would be nice if we hear something right now, like hear a little bit of the tone of the book.
okay.
Yeah? Or do you want to say some more? Yeah.
No. I think you've said it all wonderfully. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, the first part I'm going to read is about storytelling and traditional storytelling. Kirabo is a child growing up in the rural part of Uganda, and they are still living quite a traditional life. And so storytelling is a major part of Kirabo's life. And the part I'm going to read is a story that Kirabo tries to tell to the family during storytelling, but the older boys and girls prefer to gossip. And so she has to push her way through to tell the story. But the story itself takes the family by surprise because they see parallels with her life and they had not expected it. So I'm going to start when she has finally been allowed to tell her story. Once a day came when a man, his name was Luze, married his woman. Would he marry your woman instead? A boy sneered under his breath. Kirabo ignored him. They had many children, but they were all girls. A girl snorted as if Kirabo's story was already predictable. Luze became sad as every time the woman had another girl. At first, he thought it was bad luck that babies kept coming, but then the woman made it a habit. Every time, girl. One day, Luze called her. I've been patient, he said, puffing at his pipe, but I've decided to bring someone else to help you. Kirabo took a breath to gauge her audience's attention. The teenagers were silent, but their ire was still stiff in the air. That year, Luze married another woman. Through time, they had many children, but they were all girls. Luze despaired. Why are girl-bearing women not labeled so he could avoid them? Still, he married a third woman. She bore him many children, but they too were girls. So one day, Luze called all his 3 wives into the house and gave them an ultimatum. From today onwards, if you or you or you, he jabbed fingers at each woman, bear me another girl, don't bring her home. That year, the women worked harder. They fell pregnant. The first one to deliver had a daughter. One look at the baby and she was packing. The second one delivered. It was a girl. She too left. When the third delivered, it was a boy. She lifted her breast to the sky. But wait, there was something left in the stomach. She pushed, and out came a girl. The woman despaired. She looked first at her son, and then at the daughter. At the son again, and then at the daughter. She made up her mind. Next to her was an anthill. You know, in those days, babies were delivered in matoke plantations. The anthill had a big hole that opened into the ground. The woman picked up the baby girl and stuffed her inside the hole. Then she carried the baby boy home and presented him to Luze. The celebration, the jubilation. Now Kirabo was so lost in her story, waving her arms about, making faces, making Luze's voice, that she did not care whether the audience was engrossed. Luze named the boy Mulinde because he had waited a long time for him to be born. Meanwhile, every day, the woman crept back to the plantation and nursed her daughter. As she stuffed her back into the hole, she would shush, "Stay quiet." But as the girl grew, she devised songs to keep her company and to make the darkness bearable. Meanwhile, Mulinde explored the villages, the hills, the fields, the swamps, until one day he walked past the hill and heard a sweet but sad song. "We were born multiple like twins, Waswa, but father had dropped away a word, Waswa. You bear a girl, don't bring her home, Waswa. But a boy, bring the boy home, Waswa. I keep my own company with song, Waswa. Oh, Waswa, you a lie, Waswa. Oh, Waswa, you are a lie, Waswa." The song tugged at Malinde's heart. When he went home, the song followed him. The following day, it hauled him back to the anthill, and the day after, and every day. At meal times, he kept some food, and when he got a chance, he crept to the anthill and threw the food down the hole. Still the song came. Luze noticed that Mulinde was growing cheerless. When he asked what was wrong, Mulinde had no words. Luze was so troubled, he kept an eye on his son. In time, he noted that Mulinde kept some of his food and after lunch disappeared into the plantation. So one day he followed him. What he saw almost blinded him. The anthill in the plantation started to sink. But instead of fleeing, Mulinde trotted titty up to it and fed it his food. Luze grabbed his son, ran home, and sounded the alarm drums like gwanga mje, gwanga mje, gwanga mje. Now all men, wherever they were, whatever they were doing, picked up their weapons and converged in Luze's courtyard. Luze addressed them. "Brothers, this is not for shivering cowards. Something beyond words is in my plantation, inside an anthill. Now we must approach it with caution. If you are liquid-hearted, stay here with the women and children." So real men, warriors, hunters, truckers, smiths, and medicine men tightened their girdles and surrounded the plantation. Then they proceeded, muscles straining as they crouched, palms sweating around weapons. They trod softly as if the earth would crumble, hardly breathing. Finally, they had the anthill surrounded. It started to sink. Luze put his spear down and carefully dug the anthill. After a while, a girl child emerged. She was fully formed, totally human, only crumpled. The men threw their weapons down and wiped away their sweat. Even though the sun blinded her and she had to shield her eyes with her hand to look up to the huge men, even though she was as pale as a queen termite from lack of sunshine, even though she was surrounded by a vast world she did not understand, the girl sang. We were born multiple like twins, Waswa. But father had dropped a heavy word, Waswa. You bear a girl, don't bring her home. But a boy, bring the boy home, Waswa. Oh, Waswa, you a lie. Luze looked at his son, then at the girl. At the son again, then at the girl. Finally, it dawned. He lodged his spear so forcefully into the earth, it quivered. Where is she? Today I will. He did not complete the threat. The misnaming of his family, Awaswa called Molinde, and poor Nakato denied of sunshine, and then there was himself, Salong, ultra virile, called plain Luze, like ordinary men. I'm going to stop there.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for reading this passage. I found it really interesting when I read the book, the information we get before. So we get before the information, Kirabo is there in search of her mother. She is a like little child that doesn't really know who her mother is, and that is, of course, like asking herself, okay, why am I in this position, right? And then the first scene we have with her, like properly, is that she is telling this story. That she's telling the story of another girl who's also maybe not wanted by her mother. Is that something you intended to do, or as an like author, was it a decision? Because I, as a reader, had to think about how we try to find stories in stories, right? And how it's maybe important to have like twins in stories and have people have experiences in stories that are close to ours. And I felt that with the character of Kirabo.
Yes, this first story definitely is intended. Probably I wrote it after I had completed the novel. It's often when you read the first chapter of a book, you imagine that the author wrote the first chapter. Often it's not true, because often you want to open the story that in a way that gives the reader a hint of what is coming, and until you finished writing the whole story, you don't know exactly what to introduce. So, and because for me, the oral tradition, these folk tales and myth, they frame my writing. So it's when I finished writing the story, I went back into the oral tradition, the folk tales that I knew, that I told as a child, and looked for one that would frame this novel well. And of course, this is not exactly how it's told when in oral traditions, when children sit with the family to tell stories. I changed it to suit my novel. So when people in Uganda read it, they're like, what has she done?
Yeah, she did something there. It was
So, but also there's a part of it which I didn't read, where Kirabo starts to say, once a day came and the whole family keeps quiet. Well, the teenagers keep quiet. And traditionally, you need to call the audience to listen to you. And if they don't answer, you can't start, So you have to ask them that I'm going to take you somewhere. Would you like me to take you there? And if they say yes, then you start. If they keep quiet, you can't start. It was until her grandfather heard the silence of her aunts and uncles that he decided, though he had gone to bed, to say, yeah, go ahead and tell the story.
There's this one sentence, right?
Yeah,
That's always introducing.
Yeah, absolutely. But when the novel came out, people who read that part kept on saying, oh, is it because your books were rejected in the beginning that you started it like that? I hadn't thought of it. Yeah.
That's so meta.
So once I caught on, I was like, oh, of course.
That's interesting, funny. I was wondering about, it's interesting that you changed the story, because when I was reading it, or when I read things about oral history or about the practice of storytelling, it's very poignant that every individual that tells a story tells the story differently.
Yeah.
And what we don't have here right now is the expression you have with your eyes and the move you make with you kind of say it in some parts, like a little, that Kirabo is doing it, and that changed the story as well, right? And I find it interesting to take stories like that and kind of give them, they have like a structure and they have kind of a content that might be staying the same, but there is an individual aspect to it which then changed them. But I would be interested then now, and I mean, I don't know, maybe you would be as well, maybe you already have questions, then I would just be like, go for it and take myself, lean back. But if not, I would have another question then. So I was wondering then, the story you found in oral history, where was that? Like, what is the context then of the story?
So this particular one that I have read, so this was, so oral traditions, when you tell them as a child, they mean something else. They're just the surface, okay? But as you grow older, you realize they're doing something else. It's the same with the fairy tales that you grew up with. Little Red Riding Hood was just a wolf going after a kid. But now people say, oh, pedophiles, So it's the same with oral traditions. As a child, when you tell them, you're just enjoying, But as you grow older, you realize that they are doing something else. So a story like this would have been told by a woman. It would have been told by a woman who was married to a man who behaved like that. Now, the three women definitely know that the problem is not with them. I mean, for goodness sake, you bring three random women and they're all having children. Even without science, everyone knows. But within the patriarchy, a woman would not challenge the man, or would not say that. So what they would do then was to record it in a story like this. There's stories they would sit with their little children after, as they're cooking dinner, and then tell them the story. But she's actually offloading her own tensions and her own pains, and she's giving it to the children, and the children think nothing. They don't realize this is their father she's dealing with. And so when I started writing, I went back to the stories of my childhood and started to look at them from a feminist lens. And that's when I discovered all these tiny little gold nuggets lying around in oral tradition. And I could see that this was a critique of masculinities of the time.
Yeah, totally. I had to think about that as well. And also, it's very dialectic, I feel, because at the same time you have the situation of women being suppressed, yet at the same time, and I think your book does that in general very much, they are speaking for themselves. So
Yes.
like this girl is found because she has her voice and she's singing. you
Yeah.
know?
Oh, absolutely.
And it has those like aspects of like agency yet oppression at the same time. And I really like that about it as well.
Yeah, because women oppression is not, it's complex, you know. At one point they'll say, oh, they're doing this, they're doing this, they're doing that. But human nature is in such a way that we are always finding ways to make the pain bearable, to go around the high, the patriarchy. And so much as the girl is in an anthill and it's dark, she has found a way to tell her story through a song. And even though she shouldn't, because her mother told her to keep quiet, when they come to rescue her, she tells her story. And unfortunately, the man, instead of realizing what he did, he was like, where is she? You know. But that is the nature of being oppressed. People fight back in different ways.
Yeah, that's something, this like fighting back in different ways is, I feel, something you have with your figures as well. So there are many different characters within the novel. There's Nsuta, who is a very intelligent, independent nurse, like she always wanted to work. There's this chapter in the 1940s where she's eager to do her education. She goes to the city. She's really very self-determined and chooses the work over, for example, a marriage. And then there is Alikisa, Chirabu's grandmother, who is extremely, I find her very soft and not not submissive, but she's soft. She has this dream of being a mother, being in a house, and not like work would be fine with her, but like what she really wants is being a mother. Then there is Nambi Chirabu's stepmother, who is a very own specific character as well.
Yes.
And they all have different ways of being within this system of patriarchal rule, which is discussed in the book as well, and how it actually kicks in different forms within the 1970s in Uganda. I have to look at the time. Maybe we read the second passage.
Okay.
Right? Or, yeah. Or there are questions still. I don't want to... Yeah, there.
Just one
Nice.
comment. Ich könnte die, oder soll ich die Frage auf Deutsch übersetzen? Oder so?
Können wir auch machen. Ja?
Ja?
Oh, ja. Dann übersetze ich das noch. Dann spreche ich das nochmal auf Deutsch an. Ja. Wir versuchen es dann zu übersetzen. Das machen wir. She doesn't understand English. We're going to translate.
Also ich spreche mal auf Deutsch. Ich fand das auch sehr interessant an dieser Geschichte, weil man auch so einen interessanten Blick auf so einen Einblick bekommen hat, was eine männliche Perspektive ist, weil der Mann ja gesagt hat, das ist eine Frau, die kann keine Jungen gebären, die sollte doch lieber arbeiten gehen, weil sie quasi nicht gut genug ist als Mutter. Oder? Also das ist dann quasi dann eine Frau, die nicht Männer gebären kann, dann vielleicht besser arbeiten sollte. Oder so. Wenn ich das richtig verstanden habe, Anna. Like in the story, wasn't there that moment where the husband said that women who can't give birth to boys should better go working than giving birth?
This part, the story that I read, it comes from the time where I think we tend to say there's a curtain where history stops, and then there's a time of the fairy tales or of the folk tale. So that time is probably not even existent, but it's a time when women did not work, when women could only find realization of themselves through motherhood, through wifedom, and grandmotherhood. So a lot of women, therefore, were validated when they had sons. Okay, so for him, he said all women should have been labeled that this is a girl child bearing woman, and this bears.
Yeah, labor. Yeah, no label. Yeah, that you can see that she can only get. Yeah, exactly. Because with the man, that is also the bloodline, right? And the clan system that's connected to the clan system that is very dominant in this society back then, where And now we're going to translate. Also genau, Luisa hat gerade verstanden, dass an einer Stelle in der Geschichte, die Jennifer gerade vorgelesen hat, sagt, dass wenn Frauen keine Kinder bekommen können, dass sie dann doch arbeiten gehen sollten, dass das eine männliche Person sagt. Und Jennifer hat das jetzt gerade klargestellt, dass das nicht so war, sondern dass es ein Missverständnis gab zwischen dem Wort labor, englisch arbeiten, und labeled, also bezeichnet. Also in der Geschichte war es so, dass die Person gesagt hat, Frauen sollen doch gekennzeichnet werden, wenn sie nur Jungs bekommen, weil dann kann man sie ja verhindern. Also dann muss man ja nicht mit ihnen zusammen sein. Weil in dieser Geschichte, mit den Mädchen, ja, meine ich ja. Wow, ja. Weil in dieser Geschichte Jungen bevorzugt werden. Ich war schon beim nächsten Mal, genau, Jungen bevorzugt werden. Genau, und darum ging es auch in dieser Geschichte. Das haben Sie wahrscheinlich dann auch nicht so richtig verstanden. Ne? Also es ist eine Geschichte aus sozusagen so mythischen Zeiten, so ähnlich wie Märchen hier im deutschsprachigen Raum, in der eine Frau nach der nächsten heiratet, um eben Kinder zu gebären, damit er seine Familie weiter, also die Macht der Familie auch weiter aufrechterhalten kann. Und dann kriegt er aber nur Mädchen und findet es ganz schrecklich. Und dann kriegt eine dieser Frauen Zwillinge. Erst ein Jungen und dann ein Mädchen. Und diese Frau stopft das Mädchen in einen Ameisenhaufen, damit nur der Junge von dem Mann gesehen wird, weil der Mann auch vorher gesagt hat, so, wenn ihr Mädchen bringt, braucht ihr gar nicht mehr zurückkommen, wenn sie bevorzugt werden. Genau. Und das Mädchen singt dann aber und wird entdeckt irgendwann nach der Zeit von ihrem Bruder. Und genau, das ist so ein bisschen so die Geschichte. Und wir haben jetzt gerade darüber gesprochen, wie eben damit, also wie in dieser Geschichte zum Beispiel beides vorkommt. Einmal so eine Art von Unterdrückung, also die Frau, das Mädchen wird in diesen Ameisenhaufen weggesperrt. Genau, und auf der anderen Seite ersingt sie sich aber ihre Sichtbarkeit und kommt dann daraus hervor. Genau, das waren so ein bisschen die Themen, die wir jetzt gerade besprochen haben. Ja, nicht gerne. Da war auch noch eine Frage.
I would like to know how and why you chose the surroundings of Kirabo's life, so that it is set in the 70s and that you grew up in a village but financially stable. What your thoughts were creating the surroundings?
Okay, would you like to translate?
I will listen to your answer and then I will translate. Also es geht jetzt um ein bisschen den Kontext des Buches. Ich werde Ihnen das gleich noch übersetzen.
So I chose the 1970s for one major reason. Because the book was going to deal with feminism, I wanted to have the 1975 Women's Conference in Mexico happening within the book, because then that marked the time when Western feminism really took off in Uganda. So it arrived on TV, on radio, and men in Uganda were all, oh my God, what's happening? And women were in Mexico making all sorts of claims, and people were like, the world has run mad. And they were wondering whether even Ugandan women had gone there. But it was so visible, and it came in such a big way because that feminism had manifestos. It was written, like he had, bam, 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 we don't want this, we don't want that, we don't want this, and this is what we want to achieve. And then there were all these marches we saw on TV. And then there were these iconic figures of women who had specific ideas. This is what we should do, this is what we should do. So it quickly caught on in Uganda, but it mainly caught on in the middle classes because it came in English. So working class women could not relate to it. So while women like my mother, my aunties, took it up, other women, and which of course are the largest group of women, did not specifically get interested. But because in this book I'm dealing with indigenous feminism, I wanted to show what happened when that feminism arrived. Because as you can imagine, everywhere women were oppressed, they had feminist ideas. It's just that in Africa they didn't have they were not written down, they did not have these figures, there were no manifestos, there were no marches. So when this arrived, it overrode the budding ideas of indigenous feminism that were growing. And so in writing this book, this is why I go back to oral traditions to say to people, these ideas have always been here. But they are written in oral tradition folk tales because they couldn't tell the truth, speak to power, as we say. And so you need to look back in these old traditions and decode them and say, okay, who told this story? Why did they tell this story? So in the book, that is actually what I do, to show indigenous feminism walking hand in hand with the feminism that came from the West. At the same time, I set it in the rural parts, partly because I had come to Europe and seen how African children or African childhood is presented in the media as children drinking dirty water, as children dying, having flies all over them, skinny and whatever. And while those children exist in Africa, they are not the story of African childhood, not even in the villages, So it was important for me to put a narrative side by side against that. And this is why, because if I had put Kirabo in the city, everybody would say, oh, they're middle class, and the middle class came with the West, But I put her in the village to show traditional middle classes what they looked like. So she's with her grandparents. She's absolutely spoiled. She has the whole village loving her, that she even resents it. But life is not perfect, because for us in Africa, life is never perfect. So she doesn't have a mother. She doesn't know who her mother is. So that's the reason that I set it in the rural area, just to let you know what traditional middle class life was, but also give you an example of an African childhood.
Okay. Also genau, die Frage war ja, warum das Buch in den 1970ern angesiedelt ist und warum in dieser dörflichen Umgebung. Und Jennifer sagt, es hat einen besonderen Grund, und zwar ist das Buch, sollte vom Feminismus handeln oder von feministischen Ideen, die mit einem Ereignis in das Land gekommen sind, nämlich 1975 gab es die Frauenkonferenz in Mexiko. Das war eine Konferenz. 1975, genau. Gab es eine Konferenz von westlichen Feministinnen in
Mexiko.
Und da wurden eben diese ganzen Ideen, dieses damals Second Wave Feminism, würde man sagen, verhandelt. Und das war auch die Zeit, in der Ideen westlichen Feminismus in Afrika eingetroffen sind, oder zumindest in Uganda, durchs Radio, durchs Fernsehen. Und diese Konferenz sollte das zeigen. Und deswegen die Entscheidung zusammen in den 1970er Jahren, weil dann bekommt Kirabo diese Konferenz mit und die wird auch explizit thematisiert in dem Buch und dazu auch Stellungen bezogen. Und was Jennifer mit dieser Konferenz zeigen wollte, war, dass es eben es gab ein Manifest, das war diesem westlichen Feminismus war auf Englisch, und das hatte eine sehr große Sogkraft. Okay, ich werde es jetzt einfach das hatte eine sehr große Sogkraft. Und dieser Sogkraft sind auch ganz viele Menschen und Frauen in Uganda verfallen. Das fanden sie ganz toll. Und gleichzeitig hat dieser westliche Feminismus auch bestimmte indigene Formen von Feminismus, die schon in Uganda über Jahrhunderte praktiziert werden, verdrängt. Und dadurch ist eine dominantere Idee von Feminismus entstanden, mit der sich aber nicht alle Menschen in Uganda oder alle Frauen, vor allem weiblich gelesene Personen, identifizieren konnten, weil das zum Beispiel auf Englisch war und dass Personen aus der Arbeiterinnenklasse, also Frauen, die gearbeitet haben, in eher prekären Verhältnissen, das überhaupt nicht verstanden haben. Und was Jennifers Anliegen war jetzt eben zurückzugehen und zu sehen, wo gab es denn feministische Ideen in unseren indigenen Traditionen und in unseren Geschichten, die vermittelt wurden. Also eben in diesem Folktale. Und hinzugehen und die sich anzuschauen und zu verstehen, wer hat sie wann erzählt und auch zu dekodieren, aus welchem Grund wurden sie erzählt. Und Jennifers These ist sozusagen, dass diese Geschichten erzählt wurden von Frauen, um anderen Frauen zu zeigen, das ist die Position, das ist die Stellung, so wirst du behandelt, aber das ist auch die Möglichkeit, daraus so auszubrechen. Genau. Und dann, wenn jetzt jemand noch was hat, was ich vielleicht vergessen habe, könnt ihr mich gerne noch...
mit der afrikanischen Kindheit sehen?
Genau, das würde ich jetzt noch. Dann war ja noch die zweite Frage, warum auf dem Land auch. Und Kirabo ist ja in einer Mittelklasse-Familie. Und Jennifer hat eben gesagt, wenn das in der Stadt angesiedelt worden wäre, dann hätten wahrscheinlich viele gesagt, okay, das ist so diese westliche Mittelklasse der afrikanischen Städte. Aber es gab gibt eine traditionelle Mittelklasse auf dem afrikanischen Kontinent in Uganda. Die ist auch überall auf dem afrikanischen Kontinent unterschiedlich, nur das kurz dazwischen, aber in Uganda gab es eben diese Mittelklasse auch und die kam nicht mit dem Kolonialismus, sondern dieses Leben gab es davor. Und das Bild von afrikanischen Kindheiten im westlichen Diskurs ist häufig sehr prekarisiert. Also es sind Kinder mit fliegenden Augen. Man hat das so von der humanitären Hilfe oft. Ne? Also es ist so, sie trinken schmutziges Wasser, sie sind irgendwie voller Dreck. Und diesem Bild möchte Jennifer ein anderes Bild entgegensetzen, nämlich das Bild, was sie gesehen hat in Uganda in ihrer Zeit, in der sie dort aufgewachsen ist, nämlich dass es Kindheiten sind, in denen man durch das Dorf laufen kann, geliebt wird, wo es einem eigentlich an nichts fehlt, sogar so stark geliebt wird, dass man es irgendwann richtig doof findet. Und dieses traditionelle Mittelklasse-Leben, wo es den Kindern gut geht und sie umsorgt sind und genau in ihrem Dorf, das wollte sie beschreiben. Genau. It's so funny because towards this, ich übersetze das jetzt gleich nochmal. I was in Uganda also for 4 months, and I was there in the at Kabale National Park, and it was this really beautiful rural area. And I was there. I hiked through the villages at some point, and there was this one moment where I went down this little hill. And all of a sudden I was in this compound of a family, and there were those little children, and they were really kind of having all of her heads to each other and being making a plan what to do now, and being really like how I know it from me being a child, being always very busy and making plans with my friends what to do, and running around in the garden, and it was such a cute and also such a like image full of agency, just being like, okay, we have this compound, we have this like whole forest and it's us and we're going to like explore it, and that's what Kirabo does as well. Also mich hat sehr an meine eigenen Kindheiten auch erinnert, dieses Aufwachsen oder meine eigene Kindheit. Und als ich in Uganda war, habe ich eben auch so ein Bild von so, da waren so Kinder, ich bin in den Büschen, also es war es war eine eher dörflichere Umgebung auch in den Bergen, und bin so durch die Felder, da sind dann Kochbananenfelder, bin da so durchgestackst und bin dann auf einmal wie in so einem Vorgarten von der Familie gelandet, und da standen dann auch so eine kleine Gruppe von vielleicht 3- bis 6-jährigen Kindern, die ganz aufgeregt miteinander geschwatzt haben und sich wie überlegt haben, was sie jetzt als nächstes machen, und man hat richtig diese kindliche Atmosphäre von irgendwie Entdeckung und Entdeckung, Erfindergeist und so gespürt, und es war eine sehr schöne Szene, deswegen musste ich das jetzt kurz erzählen. Genau, aber ich glaube, wir schreiten wirklich sehr stark voran in der Zeit, und it would be nice to hear another part, right, of the book, and then we have more questions coming. Genau, wir hören jetzt noch eine Stelle, ich werde das dann nochmal zusammenfassen. Shall we explain before what it is, in what context?
So, I think I'll need to explain. So I've already told you that Kirabo had the major problem in her life was that she didn't know who her mother was, but she also had a problem with her sense of self. She felt that there were two of her, and the two, as she grew older, they couldn't exist in her body, and so one of them flew out of her body. And she thought, when she came to 12 years old, she decided that she had two selves because no one else had two selves. So she decided, oh, maybe I'm a witch. Oh, maybe that's why I don't have a mother, because when she had me, she realized I was a witch and she abandoned me. So she connected those two things. And the best she could do was to find another witch and ask her what was going on. And there was a woman that in Suta down the road whom her grandmother called a witch. So she ran down to her and said, I have a problem, I think I'm a witch. Actually, Suta asked her, why don't you talk to your grandmother? And she said, she wouldn't understand. And Suta said, oh, but I would understand. He said, yeah, you're the only witch I know. So she told her, I fly out of my body and I have issues being a girl. When I'm told don't do that because you're a girl, then I go ahead and do it. Or I have problems being made to do these particular chores because I'm a girl while the boys are going to do these things. And sort of liked that in Kirabo. So she said to her, look, I know where your mother is. I'm going to find her for you. And I'm going to cure that flying in you, but you need to keep coming back to see me because it's going to take a long time. So Kirabo returns a second time and she says, oh, I found your mother, but she's not ready to see you. There are reasons she can't see you just yet. Be patient. Just keep coming and I'll let you know when she's ready to see you. But when it came to why she flies out, she told her that you fly out of your body because the first woman, the woman we were in the beginning, was born in you. But as we went along, that woman was bred out of us because she was undesirable, and then we turned into this, what we look like now. But before, we were tall, we were big, we were strong, we were loud, we were everything that women are not allowed to be. So she goes and tells her all sorts of stories. So the part I'm going to read is when Kirabo has returned and to talk about how that first woman was bred out of our bodies. Does bred make sense?
Well, yeah. Well,
as in breeding.
Yeah.
Like
herausgezüchtet.
Yeah. Okay. So Kirabo asks, So how was our original state bred out? Well, that is easy. If something about you is perceived as ugly, what do? You hide it. Well, women in our original state were rejected. Kirabo kept quiet. Normally, Nsota would have built up and dramatized the rejection to give it context, but I thought you said they were worshipped as well. That's Kirabo. Worshipped, persecution, where is the difference? Nsota snapped. You know, when Nsota was off, her foul mood was killing the story. Kirabo cursed whoever had made her grumpy that morning. Nsota knelt before the hearth and burrowed under the ash with a stick until she reached the embers. She seemed lost in her own world, as if Kirabo was not around. She removed all the ash and blew on them until they glowed. Next, she covered them with hay, then put crumpled piece of paper on top. When the smoke began to drift upwards, Nsota added thin twigs and blew on them. The fire caught easily, eating the straws and paper, licking the twigs tentatively. She waited until the flame were burning confidently before adding firewood. Then she raised her head and smiled, as if Kirabo had just arrived. Kirabo began to suspect that she had been in the presence of the evil Nsota. You know that one person's mother is another's bad luck, Chisirani? Kirabo nodded, but inside she was doubtful. Women being Chisirani was petty persecution. Chisirani is bad luck. Besides, it was not just men. There were women who believed they carried bad luck on their bodies. She decided to prompt Nsota into talking about real persecution. So I heard that in those dark days, if you got pregnant before marriage, they hung you up a tree and set a fire below you. So when your grandfather opens the door in the morning, that is Nsota, and sees a woman first, what does he do? Closes it and goes back to bed. Why? Well, some women had such bad omens, they'll foul your day, week, or even a whole year. Aha. Kirabo realized that what Nsota meant and jumped to her grandfather's defense. But it is not just grandfather. Soz is the worst. If you were the first person at his shop in the morning, he tells you to wait until a man buys something from him first, or you go home and bring your little boy, even if he was born yesterday, so that he takes the money from him. A lot of women don't wait to be told. They take their baby boys with them in the morning just in case. Nsota shrugged. Shadows from the past. Shadows? Java decided that as far as storytelling was concerned, that day was dead. Nsota was not trying to make it interesting at all. So, one day, a man will throw himself at your feet. I don't know what you have done to me, Kirabo. Only you can save me. Kirabo laughed. And you, Nsota said, pointing an accusing finger at Kirabo, feeling the power he has given you in that moment, will forget that women were burned alive for bewitching men. Nsota sucked her teeth in disgust. Kirabo smiled. Real Nsota was back now. Look, a woman worshipped here as a mother goes over there and she fouls someone's day, or she fouls nature. Have you not heard of grown men who will flee if a woman strips naked in public? Yes, Nsota. Oh my God, Nsota. Kirabo was on her knees, gesturing everywhere, because the foulness of her nakedness was the one thing that made her want to tear herself out of her body and bury it. It vexed, revolted, and sickened her. At home, She had to hide her knickers after washing them so boys would not see them, even though they could display their underwear in the open to dry in broad daylight. She had never seen grandmother's knickers. In fact, the idea of them felt vulgar. Kirabo had to sit with her legs closed even before the hearth because her whatnot would put the fire out. Do you know why I flashed that jackfruit tree? Nsota shook her head. Grandmother found me up the tree with the boys and said, "And you, Kirabo, climbing trees like a boy? From now on, the fruit on this tree will go sour." Oh, she did not. Oh, yes, and the boys turned on me. That entire spat and climbed down. The following day, when no one could see, I said, "Let me go back and flash that tree right and lavish." Nsota's silence was livid. Oh, the problem is down there. Kirabo snapped her legs open and closed them. Nsota threw back her head and laughed. Oh, Kirabo, I love the way you don't bite your words. Down where? Oh, there. All the ugliness, all the rot, all the wickedness, all the witchery are packed in there. And so when grandmother still bathed me, she would say, "Oh, squat and I'll wash your ruins." "Oh, do you lie?" "God in heaven," Kirabo whispered. "People call it all sorts." "They do. Sometimes I forget how humorous your grandmother can be." "Ruins, oh. Still laughing, Sota picked up a pan with the food and placed it on fire. She asked Kirabo to take the pan filled with water and outside. When Kirabo returned, she whispered in Sota, "Did you hear about the woman on the radio?" "Which one?" "The young widow, the one whose husband died and whose father-in-law came to her house to throw her out." "No. Where have you been, Sota? She's the only topic anyone can talk about." "Oh, tell me." "So, her husband died suddenly. He was young and rich, the only one with wealth in the family, and he left her with several little ones who could not protect her. So after the burial, she went home with her children. A week later, who arrives?" "Who?" "Father-in-law, with his clan. He says, 'Hey, Mukamwana, I have come for our children and our property. Pick up your bags and go back where you came from.' So Mukamwana says, 'As you say, Tata, I'll go and pack.' So she goes to the bedroom. Guess what she does?" "What?" "She comes out naked." "You lie." "Which naked?" "Starkers, like a plucked chicken." So she sits before her father-in-law, opens her legs wide like this. Kirabo opened her hands wide and places her whole foulness right before they're like, "Wow." Then she asks, "Tata, before I go, where do I place this one? It was your son's favorite property." "You lie, Kirabo." So father-in-law scrambles out of the chair screaming, "Wala la la la, help, help, I've been killed." He sprints out of the house like a youth. "Mukamana has killed me today." Last I heard, he had to go to do all sorts of rituals to cleanse himself. You know what grandfather said? Sota shook his head. He said, "If the old man had no shame or decency and had washed shame out of her eyes, let him go and be blind." But grandmother said, "No amount of property is worth your essence. Once a woman has revealed herself to the world like that, that's it. Her whole self is gone."
No, this is the path in German here. I was just thinking, no, I lost it. If I'm going to explain to you, I could refer, because I forgot to take notes in the beginning. So basically, it is Kirabo, die zu Nsuta kommt. Vorher hat Jennifer erzählt, dass Nsuta, also genau, ich fange anders an. Kirabo hat ja von Anfang an ein Problem. Also sie ist auf der Suche nach ihrer Mutter und weiß nicht genau, wie sie finden kann. Und sie merkt, dass etwas in ihr nicht so ist, wie es bei anderen Mädchen ist. Also denkt sie, sie ist böse und wahrscheinlich, und vor allem äußert sich das darin, dass sie aus ihrem Körper aussteigt. Also sie hat immer wieder Reaktionen, in denen sie wie so körperlose Erfahrungen macht, wo sie an die Decke fliegt. Und diese zwei Dinge verbindet sie miteinander und denkt, dass sie eine Hexe ist. Und die einzige Person, die ihr einfällt, die ihr dabei helfen kann, keine Hexe mehr zu sein, ist Nsuta, die auch eine Hexe ist, die sich sozusagen auch damit auskennt und damit, was es heißt, eine Hexe zu sein. Also geht sie zu ihr. Und da korrigiert Nsuta so ein bisschen ihren Unmut über das Fliegen. Also sie sagt, hey, Kirabo, ist eigentlich gar nicht so schlimm, dass du fliegst, weil das Fliegen zeigt nur, dass in dir noch sozusagen unser Urzustand, Original State drin ist. Also das, bevor wir angefangen wurden, als Frauen unterdrückt zu werden. Und in dir ist die erste Frau wiedergeboren. Also eine dieser Frauen, die eben noch diesen Urzustand in sich getragen hat. Und damit macht Nsuta so ein bisschen was wieder weg von der Sorge, die Kirabo hat, oder von auch der Selbstablehnung, die sie so empfindet. Und diese Stelle, die wir jetzt gerade gelesen haben, da kommt Kirabo wieder zu Nsuta und erzählt, und sie fangen an zu sprechen. Also man muss sich diese Besuche bei Nsuta so ein bisschen, you call it consultation, also Beratungen. Es ist interessant, weil das ja auch ein feministisches Konzept ist. It's a feminist concept also, like to consult another person. I wonder if you made that on purpose, maybe you didn't, but like it's a little bit similar. Also es sind wie Beratungsgespräche, in denen Kirabo tatsächlich eine gewisse Form der Heilung erfährt. Also davon, dass sie eben so denkt, anders zu sein und bestimmte Dinge in ihrer Welt irgendwie als ungerecht empfindet.
Und sie will ihr helfen, ihre Mutter zu finden.
Genau, und sie will ihr helfen, die Mutter zu finden. Und an dieser Stelle, ich weiß nicht, ob ich ein Stück vorlesen soll, mal auf Deutsch. Vielleicht ist es halt schade, weil dann geht es ein bisschen von der Zeit, von der Unterhaltung drauf. Aber ich weiß nicht, Sie sagen jetzt ja, ich weiß nicht, wie hier die Stimmung ist, dann haben wir auch mal, Sie sagen nein. Wir können einfach ja mal, ich würde jetzt eine ganz kleine Stelle mal vorlesen auf Deutsch, einfach um diesen Unterschied zu haben, und dann gehen wir weiter in das Gespräch, okay? Super. Also, gut, also, es geht so ein bisschen darum, dass es Frauen als bezeichnet werden immer wieder und dass Frauen Unglück bringen. Also dass das so etwas ist, was erzählt wird über Frauen. Und ich fange da jetzt einfach erstmal an. Nsuta kniete sich vor einen der Herde und stocherte mit einem Stock in der Asche herum, bis die Glut zum Vorschein kam. Sie schien in ihrer eigenen Welt versunken, als wäre Kirabo gar nicht anwesend. Sie kehrte die Asche zur Seite und blies in die Glut, bis sie wieder glomm. Dann bedeckte sie mit Heu, danach legte sie ein zerknülltes Stück Papier obendrauf. Als Rauch aufstieg, legte Nsuta dünne Zweige oben auf und pustete. Das Feuer entflammte schnell, fraß die Strohhalme und das Papier, züngelte vorsichtig um die Zweige. Sie wartete, bis die Flammen stetig brannten, um dann Feuerholz aufzulegen und sich wieder auf die Fersen zurückzusetzen. Dann hob sie den Kopf und lächelte, als wäre Kirabo gerade erst angekommen. Kirabo kam der Verdacht, dass sie in Gesellschaft der bösen Nsuta gewesen war. Du weißt, wer für den einen Menschen die Mutter ist, kann für den anderen das Unglück sein. Kisirani? Kirabo nickte, aber innerlich hegte sie Zweifel daran. Frauen zu Kisirani zu machen, war keine richtige Verfolgung. Außerdem, es waren nicht nur die Männer. Es gab auch Frauen, die glaubten, sie trügen Unglück im Körper. Sie entschied sich, Nsuta dazu zu bewegen, von der richtigen Verfolgung erzählen. Ich habe gehört, dass in diesen dunklen Zeiten unverheiratete Schwangere an einen Baum gehängt und verbrannt wurden. Wenn dein Großvater morgens die Tür öffnet und als erstes eine Frau sieht, was macht er dann? Er schließt die Tür und geht zurück ins Bett. Warum? Manche Frauen sind so ein schlechtes Omen, dass sie dir den Tag verderben und auch die Woche und sogar ein ganzes Jahr. Kirabo begriff, worauf Nsuta hinaus wollte und versuchte, Miro in Schutz zu nehmen. Aber das ist ja nicht nur Großvater. Sosi ist der Schlimmste. Wenn du morgens die erste Person in seinem Laden bist, musst du warten, bis ein Mann vor dir etwas bei ihm kauft, oder du gehst wieder nach Hause und bringst deinen kleinen Jungen mit, auch wenn er keinen Tag alt ist, und er nimmt das Geld von ihm an. Viele Frauen warten nicht einmal mehr auf die Aufforderung. Sie nehmen morgens gleich ihre kleinen Jungs mit, für alle Fälle. Nsuta zuckte mit den Achseln. Schatten der Vergangenheit. Schatten? Kirabo kam zu dem Schluss, dass der Tag, was das Geschichtenerzählen anging, gelaufen war. Nsuta versuchte nicht einmal, es interessant zu gestalten. Eines Tages wird dir ein Mann zu Füßen liegen. Ich weiß nicht, was du mit mir gemacht hast, Kirabo. Nur du kannst mich retten. Kirabo lachte. Und du, sagte Nsuta und zeigte vorwurfsvoll mit dem Finger auf Kirabo, wirst aus dem kleinen Gefühl von Macht heraus, das er dir in diesem Moment zugesteht, vergessen, dass wir einst unter dem Vorwurf, Männer verhext zu haben, verbrannt wurden. Nsuta chippte missfällig. Kirabo lächelte, die richtige Nsuta war zurück. Und danach geht es noch darum, dass Kirabo ihr Geschlechtsteil als sowas, also das in der erzählten Welt, das als Ruinen bezeichnet wird oder als Bürde und dass es so ganz viele Abwertungen gibt und um eine Frau, die als Protest dagegen, nachdem ihr Mann gestorben ist, aus dem Haus geschmissen zu werden, als der Clan kommt, gestrippt hat und sich damit auch ihre Handlungsfähigkeit wieder gewonnen hat. Genau. Okay. Are there any questions in the audience now? I feel like maybe we can open it again. And if not, I would also ask you some more questions, I think. Yeah, I find this really interesting because I always had to think with your book that it is so much focused on dialogue. So the form is really interesting. I find most of the parts, or at least what stick with me afterwards, was that it is kind of an ongoing conversation between many, many figures. And I really like that in terms of that it might, you could argue that when you dominantly comment figures or characters in a normal, there's this like authoritative voice. Whereas when you have a dialogue and the figures or the characters are mainly speaking, it's very plural, and you leave it with the characters. It's not this like authoritative voice that you might have to with like Thomas Mann or so, where it's like, and this figure thinks this and this, like knows much more. But what role, is it something that you did intentionally, or is it again something you just prefer
to do?
Yeah.
Okay, there are two reasons for that. One is a technical reason. When you're reading a book, if the narrator steps in and tells you the story, if he or she is mediating, she's telling you, and normally you hear people say, show, don't tell, but often the narrator comes between the reader, if that's the reader, if this is the reader, and this is the text or the character in the book, the narrator comes between you when they explain. And they are necessary, they're really useful. But often when the narrator steps away and you hear the character talking, that is more believable than what the narrator is telling you. But also, rather than the narrator telling you, Kirabo has a temper, you hear her. So you draw your own conclusions, but also by hearing her, you draw closer to her. So I don't know how many of you have read Great Expectations.
I didn't.
Yeah. So you start with Pip standing before the graves of his family, and that is so and so, and that's my mom, and that's my dad, and that is. And this is me about to cry. And in that moment, you're with Pip. He gets up to no good later, but you love her. You're very strong, very close to him, because you heard his story straight from his mouth. And so when I use dialogue, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the reader to bond with the character, but also to draw their own conclusions rather than me telling you. But it's the narrator, not me. The other reason is that with feminism, because the whole concept is still new, it's not even 100 years old in terms of understanding the term feminism, we women have not learned how to pass it on to the younger generation. You know, so this is what Insuta is doing. You know, all the parts that I've read, she's passing on her feminist ideas. This is why my mother, when I talk to my mother, and I suspect most of you here, the way you look at your mothers, they were not feminist enough, okay? So for me, I tend to say, why did you let Dad do that to you? You know, it was wrong. And my mother is, come on, this is what a woman is. If I had done this, then you wouldn't have done this. And you're like, no, you didn't have to sacrifice yourself for me. But I like my dad. You know, I really do. But I said to Mom, you shouldn't have put up with it. But I like my father. Now, my nephew, my nieces, she stayed with a bastard? And you're like, hang on a minute, that's your father. You can't call. No, he is a bastard. He did this to her. He did this to her. And there's always that gap between the younger generation that, yes, my mother was a feminist, but her feminism wasn't enough. Yes, I am a feminist, but my feminist is not enough for my nieces. So in this book, I'm trying to say, let's look for a way to pass on our knowledge, our feminist knowledge, to our children. When it comes to the patriarchy, by the time they are 4 years old, boys know. I don't know. Sometimes, of course, we mothers help them by telling your boy, you can do this, you can't do this, and telling the girls, you can't do. So boys by 4 years old, the patriarchy has been passed on to them. They're getting, but the girls, we haven't. And so I use dialogue in this story because most of it is that a woman is talking to a child. She's preparing her to be a future feminist. And this feminism is that I'm going to pass you my ideas of feminism. Some of them are going to be redundant by the time you grow up. You can get rid of those. But build that up with your own ideas and then pass them on. Because Nsuta the witch has also got those ideas from her grandparents from the 1800s, who were abducted wives. And they passed on their pain and their ideas and the way they see the world to her. So this is why the book is structured in that way, you know, because I had to do research, go back and find out what was happening to you women in Uganda in the 1800s. So if Nsuta was born in the 1920s, therefore her grandmothers must have been born in the 1880s or 1860s. So what did they pass on to her? That's why.
Also ich habe jetzt gerade noch mal gefragt, was die Rolle des Dialoges ist, weil mir aufgefallen ist, dass das Buch extrem dialogisch gestaltet ist, also von der Form. Es gibt sehr wenig Erzählkommentare auf einer narrativen Ebene einer auktorialen Erzählinstanz. Also es wird wenig gesagt, also wenig kommentiert und dadurch rücken die Figuren in einen extremen Vordergrund und dadurch sieht man auch eine gewisse Form der Pluralität. Also ich finde eben, dass von außen der Blick sehr selten kommt, sondern dass die Figuren eher selber sprechen Und ich habe jetzt gefragt, ob das intentional ist. Und die Antwort ist ja. Auch weil Dialoge natürlich im Text dazu führen, sagt Jennifer, dass man näher zu den Figuren vordringt und ein anderes Gefühl für sie bekommt, auf der einen Seite. Und auf der anderen Seite das anregt, dass die LeserInnen selber Stellung oder sich selber zu diesen Figuren positionieren und nicht zu der Erzählinstanz, nicht zu einem allwissenden Erzähler. Dann hat sie noch ein Beispiel gebracht von große Erwartungen. Ich kürze das jetzt, aber muss es ein bisschen abkürzen, damit wir noch weiterkommen. Und eine andere Intention war, dass eben in diesem Buch sehr vieles, also feministisches Wissen weitergegeben wird. Und das wird im Dialog weitergewissen. Also in einer gewissen Art, das werde ich jetzt noch mal kurz an Sie richten, in some form I also thought that you're kind of like aesthetically performing a practice of how to be a feminist, you know, like it is, for me it is a like book of action where it is in some way shown how important it is to trespass the rules of like isolation, but be in a community and be in a communal setting where you learn from another person. Whereas also it's very interestingly built, because in the beginning Kirabo gets all this information and then other things happen, and you wonder, like, you also as a reader be like, I would do that, like you have somehow in some moments you have this relationship to her of not being slightly in line with what she does, yet at the same time I feel like this is what is evolved, or what is developed through the dialogue before, because you'd be like, you know all of this and now you're doing this, and like, but yet at the same time when I closed the book in the end I was like, how am I to like, it's her way. And I found that really interesting, that this was my reaction towards it. Because that's basically, I felt what you wanted to show of like feminist idea of the idea of that everyone fights in her way, in a different way. And you, for me, do that with all the figures and the diversity of their ways of doing it, and also with the contradictions that evolve through that. Genau. Also ich saß heute im Zug, mehrere Stunden, komme von einer Konferenz. Ich hoffe, ich kriege das jetzt noch hin. Also es ging jetzt gerade auch wieder um den Dialog. Und ich hatte, für mich war dieses Werk auch ein Zeichen oder eine Art von Nachahmung einer Weise, wie man Wissen weitergeben kann oder wie man sich Handeln zueinander in der realen Welt irgendwie beziehen kann. Also Literatur bildet ja immer auf eine Art Wirklichkeit ab, sie schafft sie aber auch. Also es ist so ein wechselseitiges Verhältnis. Und meine These wäre jetzt, wenn man ein Buch liest und da bestimmte Dinge passieren und bestimmte Dinge angesprochen werden, dann verändert das auch die Wirklichkeit auf eine Art. Und für mich ist dieses Buch ein Beispiel des Umgangs miteinander, in dem Wissen weitergegeben wird, tradiert wird und wie man das machen kann. Und jetzt müsste jemand einspringen. Jetzt weiß ich gerade nicht genau, was ich da... Genau.
I think I might go a step back with my comment, but what I really liked a lot also about how you told your experiences of feminism is that it's also dialogue of the younger generation explaining something to the older generation, not only the older generation passing on, but also maybe a younger niece saying, no, but this is like so much feminism of your generation, we already have those thoughts. So that's, I don't know, I think that's what's nice about the dialogue too, that it's also in both senses.
I would also like to hear about your understanding of feminism, because I feel like in Europe and European cultures often someone tells you what to do in European philosophy. This is how feminism maybe should work, and now you have to do it. And I felt with your book, you as a reader also have space for creating and for understanding and for making it your own. And can you maybe...
Yes, I think we are feminists in different ways. I tried to bring as many women in the book in terms of how they relate to the idea of feminism. So you have Aunt Y.A., the eldest of Kirabo's aunt. So she has this man who is absolutely insecure. So she kneels before him. Or she lets him drive the car. It's her car. She owns the house. But he says, sir, it's your house. She pays the children's school fees. But then she says to the children, go and say thank you to your dad. That's her idea of feminism. Then she goes behind her husband's back and says, men are like children. You have to treat them like that. You know, that is her survivor. Kirabo hates her. She really hates her for doing that. Then there's Auntie Abby, who has had so many boyfriends that it's driving Kirabo's grandparents mad because she's not marrying. And then along the way, she's becoming rich, which means she might find it very hard to marry because men don't want to marry successful women, you know, at that time. So that's another one. And then there's another aunt who was taken to school to study because her father says, that's Kirabo's grandfather, believes that, you know what, if a girl doesn't have an education, that's a girl that is about to be oppressed as a wife. And this girl ran away from school. She said, I don't want it. I just want to go, get married, and have my children and look after my husband. What is wrong with that? Don't force your idea of feminism onto me. It's all within the same family, okay? And within the school structure, you find there are these girls who are studying. One of them is one of the cleverest girls in the school. And everybody expects her to go and do science and whatever. And she's like, no, I'm going to get the degree for my mom, give it to her, and then I'll get married and do my thing, you know. And then there are the career girls who are like, you are so oppressed, you don't have a brain if you just want to be in the maternal and the domestic space. So there are all these kinds of feminisms, but these are all women have come across in Uganda. And it's not very wise to shove your ideas onto paper because that's where feminism has gone wrong. You know, just saying you are wrong, or you're not a woman enough, or you're not doing this enough. We are all different. The other idea that I wanted to put forward is that, so we have this feminism where we have major figures, you know, major feminist figures that we all look up to, and then we elevate them above ourselves, okay? But feminism starts down here because for many Ugandan women, working class women, feminism is life. You know, they wake up every morning, the minute she gets out of bed, she's going into battle in a very patriarchal society like ours, you know. But how do they fight? Sometimes they compromise. So it's not all push, 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 push and win. Sometimes you take a tactical step back and you say, I'm so sorry. And then you find other ways of pushing forward. So women are doing this every day, but we don't pay attention to those. We pay attention to those who are above us. And there's resentment, you know, down here, because they say, what is she telling us? Besides, there's a divide between the working class woman in Uganda and the middle class woman. So when the middle class woman had her education, she goes out and gets a job. When she leaves the home, she finds the working class woman to come into the maternal space and bring up her children as a maid, as an heir, to cook and whatever. And when this middle class woman comes home, she talks and treats the servant the way men talked and treated women. So to this middle working class woman, that woman is a man. So how can you say we are feminists together? Do you know? So all of these are aspects within my culture that I think that I thought I needed to handle, but using indigenous ideas, so that men who turn around and say, oh, feminism is not African, it came from the West, and it's destroying our culture, I can say, hang on a minute, you've told this story from tradition, that story is feminist.
Okay, genau, also sie hat nach dem Verständnis, Janice war das Verständnis von Feminismus gefragt und ich glaube, zusammenfassend lässt sich wahrscheinlich sagen, dass eine Kombination aus den unterschiedlichsten Vorstellungen von Feminismus, die dialogisch funktionieren, ihre Idee von Feminismus ist. Sie hat vor allem damit angefangen zu sagen, dass wir alle Feministinnen sind auf eine unterschiedliche Art. Also, dass auch in dem Buch unterschiedliche Frauen vorkommen, die ganz eigene, eigenwillige, subversive Wege finden, das Patriarchat, in dem sie jeden Tag aufwachen, zu unterwandern und auch irgendwo zu überleben, weil das die Strategien, oder weil es die Möglichkeit eben ist, in diesem System zu leben. Und da gibt es einmal Tante Ja, die eigentlich in einer ihrem Mann überlegenen Stellung ist, die Schulgebühren für die Kinder bezahlt und dann aber trotzdem zu den Kindern sagt, bedankt euch bei eurem Vater. Und irgendwo eigentlich so die eminent Gries ist und sie die Fäden zieht, aber die gesellschaftliche Anerkennung weiterhin auf dem Vater liegt. Es geht um Abby, die sehr viel Geld bekommt, die sehr selbstständig ist und immer wieder auch im Buch Momente, in denen verschiedene Konzepte des Frauseins gegeneinander ausgespielt werden, also sowas wie die Hausfrauen, die Karrieristinnen. Das ist interessant, weil es oft so Binaritäten sind, die so gegenübergestellt werden. It's oft binarities that are like just thought about how the scene in the boarding school where it is actually where it's like the women who do the career
Yeah.
and the women who are like in the household. It's funny because it's sometimes playing a lot with cliches, you know.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
only that, they're that, but on the level of how you tell the story and how different everyone is, it's actually clear that there are no cliches are right, you know. Das finde ich auch noch sehr schön. Es ist interessant, dass eben diese Klischees oft aufgerufen werden, auch im Dialog, aber dass die dadurch, dass es so unterschiedliche Figuren gibt, dann auch immer wieder auch wie so, ja, auch unterwandert werden. Genau, aber das Hauptanliegen des Jennifer, glaube ich, war zu zeigen, dass alle Frauen auf eine unterschiedliche Art kämpfen und dass es aber dennoch auch etwas gibt, was vielleicht irgendwie als Klassenkampf bezeichnet werden kann, also dass es Mittelklasse-Frauen gibt und ArbeiterInnen-Frauen und dass die eine unterschiedliche Unterdrückung erfahren und dass damit auch, dass es zum Beispiel Frauen gibt, die Kinder haben, die sehr wohlständig sind, deren ehemaligen Freundinnen, das kommt auch im Buch vor, dann diese Kinder erziehen, die dann auch Angestellten von den Frauen sind, die eben das Geld haben. Also die patriarchalen Verhältnisse eigentlich reproduzieren. Also wie ihr merkt, es ist nämlich jetzt also langsam nämlich Zeit, diesen Abend zu schließen. Like slowly, it's time to close the evening. But as you realize, there are really many topics in this book that are worth talking about. Like we didn't even talk about the relationship between Jitwa and Kirabo. We didn't talk about the relationship between Alisika and Nsuta and what they experienced. How the differences are that Kirabo is in the 1970s and they're in the 1940s and you talk a lot about like the colonial impacts, for example, in Uganda as well, but also about the different ethnicities in Uganda, how they also played out each other and how they suppressed women in different ways. We didn't talk about Kirabo living in Kampala.
Oh, women oppressing women.
Hmm?
Women oppressing women.
Women oppressing women, like there's so many things we didn't talk about, but I think we will stay a little longer here. We have a drink maybe, and have a chat, or if you want to go, like whatever. We're just going to stay, and we will leave this room open, and there will be time to buy the book now, right? In the other room, and you can get a signature, and then you can pass it on to your children and grandchildren in many years. And yeah, I hope you had a nice night. And Jennifer, the last words are yours. I don't want to take.
Thank you, people. It's unfortunate we didn't know we were going to translate as well.
Yeah.
Would have prepared probably a little bit better together, but never mind. I've enjoyed this. Thank you for coming and for keeping us company. I hope you understand Ugandan culture a little bit better. And I hope if you're reading African literature for the first time, this would be a good introduction to that continent. Thank you.